there we go, it's recording.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi. All right, Todd, you're welcome to get started whenever you like. And as people enter the waiting room, I'll let them in.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Todd Dillard. I'm a poet living in Philadelphia, just outside of Philadelphia, actually, in Havertown. I have been published or have work forthcoming in numerous places. More recently, I've been in Hobart, and I have some stuff coming out in 6th Finch. I've been in Electric Literature, McSweeney's, Fairy Tale Review, and several other places. I also have a book out with OK Donkey Press called We Vanish. It came out last year. And today I'm going to be doing a workshop filled with writing prompts on writing towards strangeness. Since we only have till 5 o'clock, I'm just going to dive right in. This is going to be a generative workshop. So effectively, I will be presenting some poems. There will be some quick discussion, and then there will be a prompt inspired by the poems following. Again, given the time crunch that we have, I'm only going to probably give about 5 minutes worth of time to respond to the prompt. And one final note, I obviously encourage note-taking because it's helpful for me to learn, but I'm also not someone who protects my content like this. So if you're someone who wants a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, I'll repeat my email at the end, but I'll give it to you now too. It is dillardtodd@yahoo.com, or you can message me on Twitter. My handle is @ToddEDillard, and my direct messages are open. You can just ping me and say, hey, I was in the Blue Stoop workshop. Could you forward me the PowerPoint presentation you gave? And here's my email address. And again, I'm happy to share. Would love to see anything you generate from the workshop, either in my DMs or emails, or if you publish something. That is also very joyful and inspiring to me. So let's get straight to the presentation. I'm calling this Towards Strangeness, Strategies to Incorporate the Odd, the Ethereal, and the Weird in Writing Narrative Poetry. Just some content warnings before we begin. There will be poems here about death, self-harm, some graphic images, grief, and stalking. And we'll dive right in. So when I built Strangeness as an idea, and when I built content around this, I wanted to kind of talk about how strangeness is often something we encounter and we love in poetry, but we often don't have strategies or ways to go about it. So I was thinking, like, why does strangeness interest me so much? And you know, in my writing and writing that I love, I find that the strange things allows us to make literal what cannot be physically observed. It gives us permission to talk about things that we feel a strong emotional connection to without letting that emotional connection overtake the poem or make the poem more abstract. So in layman's terms, I think oftentimes I have these very poignant and abstract emotions, especially centered around being a husband, being a son, being a father. And I often find that I can enter that, you know, those sentimental and those very intense emotions through sort of a side door, as long as I employ something surreal, magical, realistic, you know, things like that. So it just is, it creates an access point. It allows the writer to be in a position to anticipate the reader's reaction. And I think this is something that's very helpful about continuing to write about strangeness. You can almost always, you slowly, I guess, start to learn what readers expect, and you can almost always predict that and react and respond in a different way. And I find that to be very joyful. We'll be talking about a Jack Gilbert poem and a Cindy Randall poem in this workshop that does that amazingly. And then it's just fun. It's a really engaging and just enjoyable way to write, because it gives you a way to see yourself and gives you a way to surprise yourself with your own writing. And I find that when I'm ever in those moments of being stagnant and not being able to generate something, when I take a step back and I try to redeploy what I know about strangeness, I find something completely new and often much quicker than I would if I had just tried to plow through writer's block. So let's dive in. I also wanted to kind of create some structure around what strangers can do and how to do it. I don't think these are intended to be prescriptive. I don't think of them as rules. I just kind of think of them as touchstones, places I return to when I'm trying to work my way around a problem or an idea. So the more abstract the idea behind a poem, the clearer the writing and narrative must be. I think if you have a poem that's trying to be strange and you make the poem also one that the reader has to decipher meaning before they can approach understanding, you just kind of create a lot of roadblocks as a result. And it makes it hard for people to really get to the strangeness when they can't get past the language. That which appears should disappear or change. That which disappears should return, but something elemental has to have changed. And we're going to talk about a Marie Howe poem that does that first one better and like amazingly. The rules the poem introduces shouldn't be broken. So if suddenly people are all able to fly, the whole poem should always have people able to fly. And unless it's about that being taken away, other things like science fiction rules and stuff, space age, whatever, if you start pulling things that make the world of the poem out of the poem itself starts to fall apart. The conceit should be clear in the beginning. I usually find that's very helpful. It's just a great entry point for writing and reading the poem. The body of the poem, especially because this is a narrative workshop, deals with time and life in reaction to the conceit. So in reaction to the strangeness you introduced in the beginning. What is strange and what is odd about the poem should distort the normal. And this, I find this to be very important. The poem should not, the poem should be chiefly concerned with the normal, however. So in writing this strange poem, don't get stuck on wow or awe or have the narrator constantly react to how strange something is, because that's not an entry point for the reader. That is just an entry point for the surprise of the author I ought to find around the idea. And you see this a lot, I think, in poems where they have something odd and the narrator isn't obsessed with how odd it is. They just try to move on with their life. And again, the next poem that we're going to talk about does this very well. The poem should start simply, then become more complex. Try to anticipate how the readers might react. The ending never needs to resolve the beginning. In fact, the resolution doesn't need to be a part of the poem ever. And the literal meaning of the poem, why the strange detail is deployed in the poem, doesn't ever need to be explained. You can have your own reasoning for making a poem strange, and you never need to justify it. And I find that to be something I have to constantly remind myself about. And I also, every time I do, I find it to be like a freeing thing to keep at the forefront of my mind as I write. So Marie Howe is one of my favorite poets, and this is one of my favorite poems by her. I will read this poem and then we'll jump into some discussion, and then we'll use a prompt that is inspired by this and her work. So this is Marie Howe's poem, What the Angels Left. At first, the scissors seemed perfectly harmless. They lay on the kitchen table in the blue light. Then I began to notice them all over the house, at night, in the pantry, or filling up bowls in the cellar where there should have been apples. They appeared under rugs, lumpy places where one would usually settle before the fire, or suddenly shining in the sink at the bottom of soupy water. Once I found a pair in the garden, stuck in turned dirt among the new bulbs, and one night under my pillow, I felt something like a cool, long tooth and pulled them out to lie next to me in the dark. Soon after that, I began to collect them, filling boxes, old shopping bags, every suitcase I owned. I grew slightly uncomfortable when company came. What if someone noticed them when looking for forks or replacing dried dishes? I longed to throw them out, but how could I get rid of something that felt oddly like grace? It occurred to me finally that I was meant to use them, and I resisted a growing compulsion to cut my hair. Although in moments of great distraction, I thought it was my eyes they wanted, or my soft belly. Exhausted in winter, I laid them out on the lawn. The snow fell quite as usual, without any apparent hesitation or discomfort. In spring, as expected, they were gone. In their place, a slight metallic smell, and the dear muddy earth. Any thoughts on that? Anybody want to jump in from the chat and discuss? And no pressure, you don't have to.
Sure. Well, they have like the narrative elements, how she pushes time at first, and then, and what else there? Suddenly, soon after, all these, that push time, and then the season of spring.
Mm-hmm.
But so I'm still trying to wrap around what strange is. This doesn't seem strange to me. It seems like she has ways of offing herself on her mind, and these are things that are, I guess, how she sees things. I guess it's strange. It's a broad word,
Right. I guess I'm being, when I think of strange, there is this, I think, proliferation that is occurring in the poem that's made literal with the scissors, and it's treated literally. And so I think you pick up accurately on this, like she has self-harm mentioning in the poem. She has this negative thing, but it's made into something tangible and just very visceral, to me at least, by the scissors. So like usually you just don't have scissors popping up all over your house. And one of the reasons why I find I'm so drawn to this poem, I think, is because if that happened to me in a literal way, if scissors started appearing, in flower beds and in my actual bed, I would be terrified. But what makes this strange, I think, is, in part this unreal and this very magical and this very like scary thing keeps happening, but the focus of the poem is about the narrator going on with their life and moving forward, coupled to this strangeness, I think. And I think that's actually sort of once you go past the magical realism aspect of scissors appearing everywhere and entering this, but how do I make this normal? I think that's where that turn of strangeness occurs. So just for the sake of time, and thank you for commenting. For the sake of time, I'm gonna push ahead with a little bit of explication. So as I talked about in the beginning, the poem opens up very clearly with its conceit. The scissors seemed harmless, but then they begin to appear all over the house. So we know some rule, some thing, some component of reality has, if not been broken and is shifted, this odd thing keeps happening. And the first part of the poem is chiefly, I think, focused on complicating that, showing that this keeps happening and this keeps happening, and it's almost like building up. And then what the narrator does in reaction to it, again, is not focused on how odd this is, but rather what they need to do to fold this new oddness into their life. So they begin to collect them, filling boxes, old shopping bags, suitcases. And it seems like what they're chiefly concerned with is normalcy. Like, what will people do if they find this, if they see this very odd thing? And that introduces to this conflict and this self-harm that, and injury that Barry noted, where the narrator has this growing compulsion to cut her hair or maybe herself, and at the same time has this conflict about, well, this miracle is happening. Isn't this also grace? And the poem, it doesn't resolve the feeling, the oddness, this sort of magical haunting. It's never resolved. But at the same time, the physical part of it is planted into the winter effectively. And then again, it comes back as spring, and you see this something elemental has changed. Like there's a metallic smell in the air. So there's almost like this sense that the scissors haven't and may never go away, even if they're not seen. So based on this poem, I here's just a general notes of discussion. And again, sorry, just this workshop, I think was originally, I was planning on it being about 2 hours long. And for the sake of time, I'm going to be pushing forward rather quickly. But I have these notes and I will hand out the PowerPoint presentation to anyone who's interested. So based on this poem, I generated this prompt after Maria House, What the Angels Left. Imagine something that is important to you, but it's also a fairly normal part of your life. Doors, DVDs, rubber ducks, boots. Now think of an emotionally powerful moment in your life. This could be the death of a loved one, a car crash, a marriage, graduating, buying a house. Now write a poem without telling us about this event in which the normal thing, informed by the emotion and the sentiment behind that event, keeps appearing. So I know Maria Howe's book, What the Living Do, is actually based on poems and the event of her brother dying. And so you get that sadness, I feel like. You touch it a little bit with the way that she wrote that poem. So try to like think of the same sort of sentiment here, and then use the object that you've decided on and have the narrator observe its proliferation within their life. Have them try to fold this proliferation into their life. Have them try to take this impossible appearances and try to make something normal out of their life. And then you can end the poem with the thing disappearing. The other thing you could do, and which I've done this in poems as well, is you could take this you could flip this prompt on its head and have the same event, but imagine that thing that you've identified disappearing and vanishing, and then have this growing absence that occurs throughout the poem, and then end it when some part of it or something reappears. Does anybody have any questions?
One thing with the title, I guess ties into the grace that, the comment of the grace, like the angels leaving things that would be harmful. It's I don't know, would you say contradictory, but there's an irony between the title and what's going on, I guess.
I agree. And the more I think about it, the more I think of, the angel with the sword outside the Garden of Eden. And like, there's this very, like, what is this sharp cutting that is somehow also affiliated with grace? And I do think that there's an irony there, and that makes it that much more pleasurably complex. Like, I think you're 100% right. But I also think it's because it's almost, ironic is the right word, but I think because it's not resolved and it is still affiliated with the title and affiliated with grace, but also affiliated with cutting, that complexity, I think, is pleasurable because it's somewhat indecipherable. If that makes sense. So if no one has any more questions or discussion, I can do 5 minutes of writing time, at which point we can move on to the next prompt and next discussion, unless someone is eager to share. So I'll start 5 minutes right now. And if you would like me to toggle back to the poem or the discussion or anything else, let me know and I will. Just a heads up, we have about 1 minute left, and then I'll start the next prompt discussion. All right, that's been 5 minutes. Does anyone have anything they've started that they're interested in sharing? And again, no pressure. I understand 5 minutes is very, very fast. I've generated even a title. All right. Well, then we can go to the next prompt. And I'll do this for the next couple of prompts, but in the PowerPoint presentation, I do have ideas and titles that I would share. This next poem is titled Alone, another one of my favorite poets. It's by Jack Gilbert. I never thought Michiko would come back after she died. But if she did, I knew it would be as a lady in a long white dress. It is strange that she has returned as somebody's Dalmatian. I meet the man walking her on a leash almost every week. He says good morning, and I stoop down to calm her. He said once that she was never like that with other people. Sometimes she is tethered on their lawn when I go by. If nobody is around, I sit on the grass. When she finally quiets, she puts her head in my lap, and we watch each other's eyes as I whisper in her soft ears. She cares nothing about the mystery. She likes it best when I touch her head and tell her small things about my days and our friends. That makes her happy the way it always did. This is a heartbreaking poem for me. It's so poignant. Does anyone have any comments or any thoughts before we dive in?
I don't know if Michiko is a human or not in the beginning, you know. It could have been a pet with that name, and he wanted her to come back as a lady. And
no, Michiko is Jack Gilbert's wife, who died of cancer at a very young age.
Okay.
And in her, she's a recurring person in his poems, many of which are about her death and the grief that he feels.
I see.
Yeah, and she's Japanese. He moved to Japan and lived with her for many years, and she died very young, unfortunately. So, just discussion-wise, there is at the beginning, you get the conceit. This, if Michiko came back, I knew what she would be. And she would be this long white dress. And then, of course, that information and this setup influences the reader expectation. And I think if you listed 100 things of what Michiko would quote unquote come back as, I don't think you would ever arrive at a Dalmatian, which is just riveting in its own right. And then what you have afterward, basically springboarding off of our own expectations and the usurping of those expectations, are these details and these moments of normalcy. And they almost seem domestic, and they seem to echo what almost Jack, or the narrator, is missing. This like sort of like quiet but pleasing happiness, sitting next to this dog or his wife, talking about their friends. And he doesn't really address how odd this is, except for he brings up this mystery again at the end. And he doesn't clarify what it is. She cares nothing about the mystery. And I don't think the mystery is that she is a Dalmatian. I think the mystery is, for me at least, this broader unspoken thing. And it's as irrelevant in this instance as it would be to me at least, in the intimate domestic moment you have with your partner. And I think that's another like moment of expectation that is reinforcing this grief and this loss. And then he, I think, beautifully combines that, you know, again with the end, talking about his days, their friends, the way you would to your partner before bed or over dinner. And he brings it back and says that makes her happy the way it always did. And obviously, you know, it's not her, it's a dog. And his expectation, just like he had this sort of idea of what she would be, and then it wasn't her. He's kind of found a way to synthesize that in the end, I think, with that final line. And again, here's some just discussion notes for your reference if you are interested in the PowerPoint presentation. I really liked this poem, and I thought it was a really powerful example of one way to try this sort of entering strangeness by modifying or changing a single thing. And then my friend Cindy Randall also wrote this poem, and then I thought it did something similar, but in a much more overt and interesting in a different way. And I love this poem, so I wanted to include it in the workshop too. And it's 2020 by Cindy Randall. She is a newer poet. She's my friend. You should check out her work. Shameless plug. I love her. I swim down the road alone, sink through a pillow and discover a decapitated head resting in the seagrass. She gapes up at me and speaks, her eyes wide as two fish mouths. She does not ask, why has this happened, or who took my body? But when I respond, she flashes me her rows of milky shells. You still look beautiful, is what I say. You still look beautiful and everything is all right. Any comments before I dive in? Okay. And this is another instance where the conceit is very clearly stated to me in the beginning. You swim down a road, you sink through a pillow, suggest a dream logic, and then you have that third line, which is so arresting. And it works with the dream logic of the first two lines. But at the same time, that's a really great way to show, here's like this soft, sort of surreal, I swim down the road, I sink through a pillow, and it's automatically dreamlike. And then you have this very just gross and intense image that hits you. And Cindy doesn't stop there. She gives it a voice. She takes it further. She, again, usurps her expectations. And at the same time, while she's doing that, while she's giving this voice to this decapitated head, she's reinforcing the watery oceanic language from the beginning with swim and sink and seagrass. And then there's also this expectation again of, well, this decapitated head has spoken. What is it saying? And we don't know. We don't know directly. We're only given what the decapitated head doesn't say. And then we get the description of her milky shells, which again reinforce the ocean language, and her teeth. And this goes back to earlier in the Marie Howe poem, where the reaction to this oddness is, you know, to try to make it normal. Like, you're beautiful, you're all right. And it's so clear that this person, this decapitated head, can't possibly be all right. They have no body. But there's still this urge from the narrator to try to make things normal. So this will, again, discussion for reference. This takes us to our next prompt, and it's noun swap. Imagine someone or something important to you. And now think of a noun and write a poem in which the thing that is important to you is literally the noun that you are thinking of. And write a poem in which you engage with and interact with this thing. It could be, obviously you have a deceased spouse that becomes a Dalmatian, or you have the year 2020 become a decapitated head. Just remember that when you introduce the concept of this noun swapping, you don't focus on how weird it is. You want to, quote unquote, couch the poem in normalcy. And here's some example ideas, titles, if you feel so inspired, or if this is an easier way to present the logic to you. And then once again, I will give 5 minutes of writing time. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you need to talk about the poems, I happily will. But let's do 5 minutes.
Todd, could you go to the prompt slide again? Someone asked in the chat to move the prompts. Thank you.
Just for reference, I have the PowerPoint presentation on full screen, so I don't see the chat. I'm sorry I missed that. I see. So we have another minute or so. All right, we have hit the 5-minute mark. Is anybody interested in sharing, or do they have any thoughts or comments or questions before we move on? Victoria?
Yeah, okay, just make sure you saw it.
I'm sorry about the noise in the background. So I wrote a poem. It's called Fur Baby. Hold on, let me go outside real quick. Okay. It's called Fur Baby. Her soft gray fur flowing in the wind. Her green eyes stare back at me as her mouth gives a gaping grin. Is she from Alice in Wonderland or Cats and Dogs? I sit down and think of a movie from my past starring cats.
All right. I like the I like how you have a lot of tactile details, and like it feels like there are things in there that you can touch, and at the same time there is the mystery that was in that Jack Gilbert poem that's hovering above it. That's great. I mean, especially for a few minutes worth of work. Good job, and thank you so much for sharing with us.
I could share.
I can't see who's talking, but please do.
This is Lee.
All right, Lee.
It's a very beginning. Hold steady and place direct pressure to drill an even hole in plaster, smaller than the anchors so they can bulge through and belong. Breathe and give it your shoulders weight. And that is all I have, but it's going to connect with a female ancestor of mine and explore the way that she supports me in my different experience of femaleness.
I think that's really compelling. I was just thinking about wall anchors actually, because I was just hanging a shelf. and it's such an odd thing of the work you have to do to figure out where to drill, and then there's the work of having to drill and make space. But you're right, it has to be the right space. And then there's the work of getting the anchor into the wall, and if you did everything right, then the anchor continues to do this work, and you don't see it, but it's there supporting, in my case, a very odd round shelf that's over the bed.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yeah, very, very thrilling. But that's great. I mean, both examples found both. Thank you again for sharing.
Thanks.
It's such an interesting way how people have taken this prompt and used it as an access point to things that, I think would be difficult to talk about in of themselves, but this approach somehow makes them tangible, touchable, and like literally in your case, able to support something else. So thank you for sharing. Does anybody else want to share? So for the sake of time, I'm going to move forward. And again, thank you so much, Victoria and Lee, for sharing. So this poem's called Love Poem Satyr by Donica Kelly. I have filed my horns and trimmed my beard and warmed my throat into a fine and sober warble. I play a little song in the key of your name. I call to you with the breath of spring, a small wind warmed in my breast and shaped by the lips you loved. Love, I see you've closed the windows to your heart, closed to the door and blacked the light. I put my ear to the glass, to the wood. I hear your heart like the wind in the reeds, beating out my name. I love this poem. It's so complex in such a short space. Donica Kelly is a fantastic poet. Does anybody have any thoughts before I dive in?
I want to know why she's a satyr.
That is going to be discussed. That is, you're thinking ahead. All right. So this is just a quick discussion and annotation. The conceit is I am a satyr. And why is such a good question here. Why is this person a satyr? Well, a satyr is, a spirit of like lust and wine and partying that's Dionysian. And so there's sort of this eroticism that's automatically thrown there. And satyrs are known for seducing maidens and luring them away. So there's this, I think the why is a, platform, effectively, the satyr becomes a platform or an idea for the narrator to wield in order to talk about this desire and this power of being alluring and luring someone. And the trick with that and where it becomes complicated and where Kelly does amazing work is usually satyrs aren't beholden to any one particular love, but this one is. So you have this idea of Dionysian love, of lust and whatever, but the key to this satyr is the other's name. There's this you. And then it's complicated further in that that final line of the second stanza with loved. So this isn't something that is happening or ongoing per se. This is something past. This is effectively a breakup poem, or a I've been dumped or broken up poem. So here's this loved that the satyr still loves. And then there's this play of music too throughout. Like I tried to stress in the beginning, but the syllables and whatnot in the beginning are so simple and kind of musical. And as the poem gets complex, the syllables get myriad and more complex too, and really chewy. And it's such a neat twist, to me at least. And you get like that line, closed to the door and black the light. Lots of stops, lots of abrupt halts in the pacing of the poem when the satyr encounters barriers, literal barriers to their other and their love. And then you had, I think at the beginning, obviously the song, and the song is the key. But then you also have, this end where the name was a song, the heart is a wind, and is therefore uncatchable in a way. Again, discussion notes for those who are referencing the PowerPoint later. And then we'll get to the prompt. So I think the why of this is a satyr, and why was the satyr chosen, is that I think it had the most useful components to it. It had this desire, it had the sense of power, and then it complicated that by increasing the desire, but usurping the power, you know? And I think that made this new thing, this new element to the paradigm of a satyr and the perspective of the satyr. And that's kind of what the prompt is based on. Think of something you want to write about: cooking dinner, going to the movies, you know, going to the public swimming pool. I mean, at this point, going to a restaurant. I mean, my gosh, how impossible is that to imagine? But write a poem from the perspective of a mythical creature or an object, and try to couch that activity and things that are important to that person. Like, think of Medusa going to the beauty salon. Try to take this thing that's really important to you, but see it from the perspective of a mythical and magical creature. And the couch at the beginning of the poem, and they could see, you know, or even the title, like I said, Medusa goes to the beauty salon. And here are some example ideas and titles. And once again, we'll do, this is the last prompt. We'll do 5 minutes, and then we could do 5 more minutes of questions or discussion, or if people would like to share after that. But I'll start that 5 minutes now. So we have hit the 1 minute mark. All right, that is 1 minute. Does anybody feel comfortable sharing?
I'll read. Say Me Beth.
Thank you, Amy.
Stentor, as in stentorian, is trapped in the small town firehouse. His voice is powerful as 50 men, leashed to announce the occasional kitchen fire or fallen tree crushing the corner of a roof. A diaphone bellows like his dying breath. The New York City EMT tried to press life back into him so hard his liver tore. 3 repeated blasts tear the air, sound waves rent, and now when I hear it, it is the sound of pandemic.
Wow. That's so interesting to me because obviously pandemic has overtaken our lives, but then to use volume and loudness attached to that, it brings to mind pandemonium, which works so well because we're like in this sort of chaotic loudness in a way. That was very interesting. Very great use of the prompt. Thank you. Would anybody else like to share?
I'll give it a shot. Can you hear me?
Yes, go for it.
Let's see, I have E.A. Poe wants to come down. Admire his focus, though it could be sustained. Miss some sleep, miss some meals. I miss the work. Don't think he's rude enough to those who interrupt his process. I'm over his right shoulder. I can see it all. His written rants, his sloppy scribblings. My portrait seems to slide, slip. From time to time, he straightens me. Wouldn't mind creeping out of the frame and grabbing a pen.
Nice. That's really fun. I didn't know what perspective was being used at first. And so like that question really informed the whole poem. And I love that. I love like finding out kind of right at the end. You deployed the mystery really well there.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Amy Beth, you're welcome. Thank you. So that brings us to about 1.5 minutes shy of 5 o'clock. Thank you for your poems and thank you for sharing this time with me. I'm not going to jump off immediately, obviously. If anyone has any questions or anything, I will be here. And I'll stay on for a little bit. I am also, again, reachable at my Twitter, Todd Dillard. Or if you want to email me, my email address is dillardtodd@yahoo. And I can send you this PowerPoint presentation for your reference anytime. And again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks for
Good
coming.
session.
on.
You.
You're welcome.
Todd, is it all right if I get the PowerPoint from you so I can send it to just everyone who registered for the event.
Yeah, sure.
Does that work for you? Okay.
Yep.
You can just reply to the email that, if you reply all to the email that Emma sent you this morning, you should be able to just attach it and send it to me.
All right. So I got a couple emails from her. Let me see. Yep. Okay.